Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. What I need to do now is see where this stream started, because I have no idea where this stream started. But hello, I hope you're doing well. I see one person in here. No, I'm just curious who it is. Bear with me 1 second, too. Ah, man. All right. Thank you, Matt. Looks like I'm going to have to try option B. Sorry, y'all. What's up, Lucky James? I'm just getting this one pulled up, y'all, again. No idea why that's happening. Everybody hear me okay? I hear you just fine. Excellent. What's up, Uncle Brangus? I hope you're doing well tonight, fam. It's good to see you. It's good to see everybody here. Again, I'm just having trouble with the stream and Streamlabs doing its thing, so just bear with me while I do this, as well as I'm going to have to go and get rid of the other ones. So, all right. Appreciate that. I did try and start so what I did instead this time, Matt, was I scheduled the whole stream from the Streamlabs mobile app, and I tried to start it again from there, and I had to redo everything, and when it finally went through, it just popped up another one, so I might have to call, like, technical support, because as far as I know, nobody else is really having trouble with this, so. But I appreciate y'all. I'm working on getting everything switched over now. And hopefully I won't have to do this much longer. All right. We're just going to do this. And then we'll do this. Doing good. Some lower back pain today. Just showed. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. Trust me, I'm no stranger to back pain. We're gonna get into some fun things tonight, y'all. Yes, we're gonna get into fun things tonight, and of course, Matt, if you could just make sure that we can get this one shared out with everybody, I appreciate that. Yeah, I noticed that too. She'll find her way. What I did was I went ahead and I just deleted that old stream. And so this one now should be the only one that anybody sees that is live right now. 18-second one. Oh, that was the first one it did. Should have just left it up. I thought it wasn't rolling. All right. But enough about me. How's everybody else doing tonight? Mm-hmm. And headset on. Yeah, okay, cool. For some reason that whole setting was messed up, so I think something updated. So I did get excited when that happened, because I thought maybe they would have fixed my little issue. See 5 people here. Once again, appreciate everybody being here, everybody waiting also. I know that we were waiting for some time, and I'm so sorry that that took me a minute to get to. Maybe Santa will bring me a faster computer. There we go. Stupid. All right, that should be the last little itty bitty thing I have to do before everything is good. Mariah, hello, welcome. Welcome, welcome. It is good to see you, Lucky James. I'm sorry to hear that you had a headache and dealing with a little sleep. I'm hoping that I can. See, that's what I did, Matt. I tried to start the scheduled one and it didn't happen. There you are, Laura Lovejoy. No worries at all. In fact, I was gonna wait for you. Good evening, Mariah. Yes, indeed, it is good to see you. Professor Richboy, what's going on? No worries at all. Much respect and mad love to you as well. I hope you and your mom are doing well. And yeah, appreciate you popping in at any time for any length. And I hope you have a good rest of your night, fam. On the TV now. That's my nail clippers. I'm making sure to do the fine tuning of the nails here before I solve our cube. And then we're going to get into some ghost stories tonight. From what I can tell, they seem to be very, very kid friendly. But kid of my early military training days with the last name Lovejoy. Woke up this morning with a slight headache. Wasn't feeling painful, but it was bothersome. You get the light ache things bother you more than percent. Yeah, exactly. I understand that 100%. And this is the stream to sit back, chill, relax, grab your guys' favorite story beverage of choice. As you all know, and those who are aware, coffee is my story beverage of choice. And we got the cube. Lovejoy is an epic last name. There was a show called Detective Lovejoy on UK back in the day. Do you want to know where Lovejoy rings for me? That would be Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons. That's what you make me think of, Miss Laura. Yeah, no worries at all. No worries at all, Miss Lovejoy. You do what you got to do. Oh, that is happening to me. I have a headache since last night. I woke up worse. No. Rafa Lassa Fee. How you doing, fam? It's good to see you. Hope everyone had a blessed weekend indeed. All right. I think that's the first time I'm sitting back. In full transparency, daylight saving time, as much as it doesn't affect us here in Arizona, it very much affects me everywhere else in my everyday life, as my work schedule is ran completely on Eastern time. And so I forgot I went in early, or normal time for me, but I went into work early, and I had to leave a little early too so that I could make sure I could be here. So I'm going to adjust my streams. I have a very supportive supportive team partner at work that is willing to help me out to make sure that I can be here for you guys when my scheduled streams are for you guys. So if something does have to change, I will of course let everybody know, but I appreciate your patience while I try and juggle both lives. Then go to my daughter. She was sick yesterday, but she's doing better now. Excellent. I love that. Used to live on a street Reverend Lovejoy was named after in downtown Portland. Let's go. Asked me if my dad was the Rev. I said, no. He's a priest. Actually saw a doctor, but actually a doctor. That's funny. But now you have given new meaning to the name Lovejoy, and now you and Dex are the first ones I think of when I hear the name. That's not right. Mm-mm-mm. 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 There we go. Mm-hmm. Just like that. Where's our last little piece here? Pop that in just like this. And then here's our last layer. Yeah, of course. It's our last layer, and there's our L that we're so fond of. Take this clockwise. We're gonna do bop 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 bop. And now we have our cross. Now we get our sides. We got one matched with red. Let's see. Red match, blue match, orange match. These two match. These two do not. Gonna take this one. Oh, did I mess that up? How did I mess that up? I did this 1,000 times. Yep, messed it up. I guess it has been a long day. Messed up my cross. Broke my cross. There we go. This one goes in over here. And then we're going to get into some ghost stories here. And we can absolutely dip back into Edgar Allan Poe. But I actually did want to introduce another writer a little bit early on because we're going to be reading a book by this author, which is Charles Dickens. Oh, those moments. Charles Dickens. And little did I know, he actually wrote 3 ghost stories. And I think we're going to get into those. There we go. Looks like we got 8 people here ready to read. Let's go. There we go. Orient them correctly. Professor Rich Boy. I will listen while I chill. Excellent. Let's go. Appreciate you being here. That also gave me a little inadvertent time for the Kindle to get fired up here. All right, I think that's good enough charge. That's good enough charge. Pop this down. This up. Boba, join us Thursday. We're going to keep going on the Squirtle. Yeah, 3 ghost stories. Well, it's from a book. And honestly, y'all, I feel like the books themselves are a lot bigger. And these are just like clips of these books. But I thought it was a pretty good read. Yep. There is the haunted house. We're going to get through as much as we can. The trial for murder and the signal man. Those are the 3 ghost stories. So we're about 15 minutes in here. Appreciate everybody being here. Bulbasaur, I'm starting to learn the names. I'm trying to learn as much as quickly as I can. You're doing really well. That is Bulbasaur. Right there. He is number 1 in the Pokedex. Number 1. It all starts with him. but he wasn't the first one created. That was actually Rhyhorn. Or Rhydon. Rhydon was the first Pokemon ever created. All right. Everybody ready for reads? Got 8 people here, 15 minutes in. Let's go. The Haunted House in 2 chapters. 1859. Charles Dickens. The Mortals in the House. Under none of the accredited ghostly circumstances that environed by none of that conventional ghostly surroundings did I first make acquaintance with the house which is the subject of this Christmas piece. I saw it in the daylight, with that sun upon it. There was no wind, no rain, no lightning, no thunder, no awful or unwonted circumstances of any kind, to heighten this effect. More than that, I had come to it direct from a railway station. It was not more than a mile distant from the railroad station, and as I stood outside the house, looking back upon the way I had come, I could see the goods train running smoothly along the embankment in the valley. I will not say that everything was utterly commonplace, because I doubt if anything can be that, except to utterly commonplace people, and there are vanity steps in. But I will take it on myself to say that anybody might see the house as I saw it, any fine autumn morning. The manner of my lighting on it was this. I was traveling towards London out of the north, intending to stop by the way, to look at the house. My health required a temporary residence in the country, and a friend of mine who knew that, and who happened to drive past the house, had written to me to suggest it as a likely place. I had got into the train at midnight and had fallen asleep, and had woke up and had sat looking out the window at the brilliant northern lights in the sky, and had fallen asleep again, and had woken up again, to find the night gone, with the usual discontented conviction on me that I hadn't been to sleep at all. Upon which question, in the first imbecility of that condition, I am ashamed to believe that I would have done wager by battle with a man who sat opposite me. That opposite man had through the night, as the opposite man always had, several legs too many, and all of them too long. In addition to this unreasonable conduct, which was only to be expected of him, he had had a pencil and a pocket-book, and had been perpetually listening and taking notes. It had appeared to me that these aggravating notes related to the jolts and bumps of the carriage, and I should have resigned myself to his taking them, under a general supposition that he was in the civil engineering way of life. If he had not sat staring straight over my head whenever he listened, he was a goggle-eyed gentleman of perplexed aspect, and his demeanor became unbearable. It was a cold, dead morning, the sun not being up yet, and when I had outwatched the paling light of the fires in the iron country, and the curtain of heavy smoke that hung at once between me and the stars and between me and the day, I turned to my fellow traveler and said, "I beg your pardon, sir, but do you observe anything particular in me?" For really he appeared to be taking down either my traveling cap or my hair with a minuteness that was a liberty. The goggle-eyed gentleman withdrew his eyes from behind me as if the back of the carriage were 100 miles off, and said with a lofty look of compassion for my insignificance, "In you, sir? B? B, sir?" said I, growing warm. "I have nothing to do with you, sir," returned the gentleman. "Pray let me listen. Oh." He enunciated this vowel after a pause, and noted it down. At first I was alarmed, for an express lunatic and no communication with the guard is a serious position. The thought came to my relief that the gentleman might be what is popularly called the rapper, one of a sect, for some of whom I have the highest respect, but whom I don't believe in. I was going to ask him the question when he took the bread out of my mouth. "Will you excuse me?" said the gentleman contemptuously. "If I am too much in advance of common humanity to trouble myself at all about it, I have passed the night, as indeed I pass the whole of my time now, in spiritual intercourse." "Oh," said I, somewhat snappishly. "The conferences of the night began," continued the gentleman, turning several leaves of his notebook, "with the message, 'Evil communications corrupt good manners.'" "Sound," said I. "But absolutely new?" "New from spirits," returned the gentleman. I can only repeat my rather snappish "Oh," and ask if I might be favored with the last communication. "A bird in the hand," said the gentleman, reading his last entry with great solemnity, "is worth two in the Bosh." "Truly I am of the same opinion," said I. "But shouldn't it be Bush?" "It came to me. Bosh," returned the gentleman. The gentleman then informed me that the spirit of Socrates had delivered this special revelation in the course of the night. "My friend, I hope you are pretty well. There are two in this railway carriage. How do you do? There are 17,479 spirits here, but you cannot see them. Pythagoras is here. He is not at liberty to mention it, but hopes you like traveling. Galileo likewise had dropped in with this significant intelligence. I am glad to see you, amicio. Como sta? Water will freeze when it is cold enough. Adio." In the course of the night, also, the following phenomena had occurred. Bishop Butler had insisted on spelling his name Bubbler, for which offense against orthography and good manners he had been dismissed as out of temper. John Milton, suspected of willful mystification, had repudiated the authorship of Paradise Lost and had introduced, as joint authors of the poem, two unknown gentlemen, respectively named Grungers and Sadgingtone? Sad, Scaddingtone. And Prince Arthur, nephew of King John of England, had described himself as tolerably comfortable in the seventh circle, where he is learning to paint on velvet under the direction of Miss Trimmer and Mary Queen of Scots. If this should meet the eye of the gentleman who favored me with these disclosures, I trust you will excuse my confessing that the sight of the rising sun and the contemplation of the magnificent order of the vast universe made me impatient of them. In a word, I was so impatient of them that I was mightily glad to get out at the next station, and to exchange these clouds and vapors for free air of heaven. By that time it was a beautiful morning, as I walked away among such leaves as had already fallen from the golden brown and russet trees, and I looked around me on the wonders of creation, and thought of the steady, unchanging, and harmonious laws by which they are sustained. The gentleman's spiritual intercourse seemed to me as poor a piece of journey work as ever a world saw. In which heathen state of mind, I came within view of the house, and stopped to examine it attentively. It was a solitary house, standing in a sadly neglected garden, a pretty even square of some 2 acres. It was a house of about the time of George II, as stiff, as cold, as formal, and as in bad taste as could possibly be desired by the most loyal admirer of the whole quartet of Georges. It was uninhabited, but had, within a year or two, been cheaply repaired to render it habitable. I say cheaply because the work had been done in a surface manner and was already decaying as to the paint and plaster, though the colors were fresh. A lopsided board drooped over the garden wall, announcing that it was to let on very reasonable terms, well furnished. It was much too closely and heavily shadowed by trees, and, in particular, there were 6 tall poplars before the front windows, which were excessively melancholy, and the site of which had been extremely ill chosen. It was easy to see that it was an avoided house, a house that was shunned by the village, to which my eye was guided by the church spire some half a mile off, a house that nobody would take, and a natural inference was that it was the reputation of being a haunted house. No period within the 24 hours of day and night is so solemn to me as the early morning. In the summertime I often rise very early and repair to my room to do a day's work before breakfast, and I am always on those occasions deeply impressed by the stillness and solitude around me. Besides that, there is something awful in the being surrounded by familiar faces asleep, in the knowledge that those who are dearest to us and to who we hold dearest are profoundly unconscious of us, in an impassive state, anticipative of that mysterious condition of which we are all trending. The stopped life, the broken threads of yesterday, the deserted seat, the closed book, the unfinished and abandoned occupation, all are images of death, and the tranquility of the hour is the tranquility of death. The color and the chill have the same association, even a certain air that familiar household objects take upon them when they first emerge from the shadows of the night into the morning, of being newer, and as they used to be long ago, has its counterpart in the substance of the worn face of maturity or age and death into the old youthful look. Moreover, I once saw an apparition of my father at this hour. He was alive and well, and nothing ever came of it. But I saw him in the daylight, sitting with his back towards me, on a seat that stood beside my bed. His head was resting on his hand, and whether he was slumbering or grieving, I could not discern. Amazed to see him there, I sat up, moved my position, leaned out of bed, and watched him. As he did not move, I spoke to him more than once. As he did not move then, I became alarmed and laid my hand upon his shoulder, as I thought, and there was no such thing. For all these reasons, and for others less easily and briefly stateable, I find the early morning to be my most ghostly time. Any house would be more than or less haunted to me in the early morning, and a haunted house could scarcely address me to greater advantage than that. I walked on into the village, with the desertion of this house upon my mind, and found the landlord of a little inn, sanding his doorstep. I bespoke breakfast, and broached the subject of the house. "Is it haunted?" I asked. The landlord looked at me, shook his head, and answered, "I say nothing." "Then it is haunted." "Well," cried the landlord in an outburst of frankness that had the appearance of desperation, "I wouldn't sleep in it." "Why not?" "If I wanted to have all the bells in the house ring with nobody to ring 'em, and all the doors in the house bang with no one to bang 'em, and all sorts of feet treading about with no feet there, why then," said the landlord, "I'd sleep in that house." "Is anything seen there?" The landlord looked at me again, and then, with his former appearance of desperation, called down his stable yard for Iki. The call produced a high-shouldered young fellow with a round red face, a short crop of sandy hair, a very broad humorous mouth and turned-up nose, and a great-sleeved waistcoat of purple bars, with mother-of-pearl buttons that seemed to be growing upon them, and to be in a fair way, if it were not pruned, of covering his head and overrunning his boots. "This gentleman wants to know," said the landlord, "if anything's seen at the Poplars." "Odded woman with a howl," said Iki, in a state of great freshness. "Do you mean a cry?" "I mean a bird, sir." "A hooded woman with an owl? Dear me! Do you ever see her?" "I see the howl." "Never the woman?" "Not so plain as the howl. But they always keeps together." "Has anybody ever seen the woman as plainly as the owl?" "Lord bless you, sir, lots." "Who?" "Lord bless you, sir, lots." "The general dealer opposite, for instance, who is opening his shop." "Perkins? Bless you, Perkins wouldn't go a nigh that place. No," observed the young man in considerable feeling. "He ain't overwise, ain't Perkins. But he ain't such a fool as that." Here the landlord murmured his confidence in Perkins knowing better. "Who is, or who was, the hooded woman with the owl, do you know?" "Well," said Iki, holding up his cap with one hand while he scratched his head with the other, "they say in general that she was murdered, and the howl he hooted the while." This very concise summary of facts was all I could learn, except that a young man, as hardy and likely a young man as ever I see, had been took with fits and held down in 'em. After seeing a hooded woman, also, that a personage dimly described as a "hold chap," a sort of one-eyed tramp answering to the name of Jobby, unless you challenged him as Greenwood. And then he said, "Why not? And even so, mind your own business." Had encountered the hooded woman a matter of 5 or 6 times, but I was not materially assisted by these witnesses, inasmuch inasmuch as the first was in California, and the last was, as Iki said, and he was confirmed by the landlord, anywheres. Now, although I regard with a hushed and solemn fear the mysteries between which and this state of existence is interposed, the barrier of great trial and change that fall on all the things that live, and although I have not the audacity to pretend that I know anything of them, I can no more reconcile the mere banging of doors, ringing of bells, creaking of boards, and such like insignificances, with the majestic beauty of pervading analogy of all the divine rules that I am permitted to understand. Then I have been able, a little while before, understand that I had been able, a little while before, to yoke the spiritual intercourse of my fellow traveler to the chariot of the rising sun. Moreover, I had lived in 2 haunted houses, both abroad. In one of these, an old Italian palace, which bore the reputation of being very badly haunted indeed, and which had recently been twice abandoned on that account, I lived 8 months most tranquilly and pleasantly, notwithstanding that the house had a score of mysterious bedrooms, which were never used and possessed, and one large room, which I sat reading, times out with number at all hours, and next to which I slept, a haunted chamber of the first pretensions. I greatly hinted these considerations to the landlord, and as to this particular house having a bad name, I reasoned with him. Why, how many things had bad names undeservedly, and how easy it was to give bad names? And did he not think that if he and I were persistedly to whisper in the village that any weird-looking old drunken tinker of a neighborhood had sold himself to the devil, he would come in time to be suspected of that commercial venture? All this wise talk was perfectly ineffective with the landlord, I am bound to confess, and was as dead as failure as ever I made in my life. To cut this part of the story short, I was piqued about the haunted house, and was already half resolved to take it. So after breakfast I got the keys from Perkins' brother-in-law, a whip and harness maker who keeps the post office and is under submission to most rigorous wife of the doubly seceding little Emmanuel Persuasion, and went up to the house, attended by my landlord and by Iki. Within, I found it, as I had expected, transcendently dismal. The slowly changing shadows waved on it from the heavy trees were dully in the last degree. The house was ill-placed, ill-built, ill-planned, and ill-fitted. It was damp. It was not free from dry rot. There was a flavor of rats in it, and it was a gloomy victim of that indescribable decay which settles on all the work of man's hands, whether it's not turned to man's account. The kitchens and offices were too large and too remote from each other. Above stairs and below, waste tracts of passages intervened between patches of fertility represented by rooms, and there was a mouldy old well with a green growth upon it, hiding like a murderous trap near the bottom of the back stairs, under the double row of bells. One of these bells was labeled, on the black ground in faded white letters, Master B. This, they told me, was the bell that rang the most. Who was Master B? I asked. Is it known what he did while the owl hooted? Rang the bell, said Iki. I was rather struck by the prompt dexterity by which this young man pitched his fur cap at the bell and rang it himself. It was a loud, unpleasant bell, and made very disagreeable sound. The other bells were inscribed according with the names of the rooms at which their wires were conducted, as picture room, double room, clock room, and the like, Following Master B's bell to its source, I found that young gentleman to have had but indifferent third-class accommodation in a triangular cabin under the cook loft, with a corner fireplace with Master B. Must have been exceedingly small if he were ever able to warm himself at, and a corner chimney piece like a pyramidal staircase to the ceiling for Tom Thumb. The papering of one side of the room had dropped down bodily with fragments of plaster adhering to it, and almost blocked up the door. It appeared that Master B, in his spiritual condition, always made a point of pulling the paper down. Neither the landlord nor Iki could suggest why he made such a fool of himself, except that the house had an immensely large, rambling loft at top, and made no other discoveries. I was moderately ill-furnished, but sparely. Some of the furniture, say a third, was as old as the house. The rest was of various periods within the last half-century. I was referred to the corn chandelier in the market. Sorry. I was referred to a corn chandler in the marketplace of the country town to treat for the house. I went that day, and I took it for 6 months. Okay, there's no pauses here, but I'm going to pause here. What's up, Adam? What's up, Alec? How are we doing tonight? How is everybody doing? Doing well? Tip, tip, tip. Oh, I appreciate you, boo. Hope you're doing well, Lori. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Hope you're doing well today, Mr. Alec. And Adam Jones, my ghosty brother, I hope you're doing well. It was just the middle of October when I moved in with my maiden sister. I venture to call her 8 and 30. She is so very handsome, sensible, and engaging. We took with us a deaf stableman, my bloodhound Turk, 2 women servants, and a young person called the Odd Girl. I have reason to record of the attendant last enumerated, who was one of the St. Lawrence's Union female orphans, that she was a fatal mistake in a disastrous engagement. The year was dying early. The leaves were falling fast, and was a raw, cold day when we took possession, and the gloom of the house was most depressing. The cook, an admirable woman, but of a weak turn of intellect, burst into tears on beholding the kitchen, and requested that her silver watch might be delivered over to her sister. 2 Tuppence Gardens, Liggs Walk, Clapham Rise, in the event of anything happening to her from the damp. Streaker, the housemaid, feigned cheerfulness, but was the greater martyr. The Odd Girl, who had never been in the country, alone was pleased, and made arrangements for sowing an acorn in the garden outside the scullery window, and rearing an oak. I don't know why all of that was so hard to read. We went before dark through all the natural, as opposed to supernatural, mysteries incidental to our state. Dispiriting reports ascended like the smoke from the basement in volumes, and descended from the upper rooms. There was no rolling pin. There was no salamander, which failed to surprise me, for I don't know what it is. There was nothing in the house. What there was broken. The last people, what was there was broken. The last people must have lived like pigs. What could the meaning of the landlord be? Through these distresses, the Odd Girl was cheerful and exemplary. But within 4 hours after dark, we had gotten into supernatural groove, and the Odd Girl had seen eyes and was in hysterics. My sister and I had agreed to keep the haunting strictly to ourselves, and my impression was, and still is, that I had not left Iki, when he helped to unload the cart alone with the woman, or any one of them, for 1 minute. Nevertheless, as I say, the odd girl had seen eyes. No other explanation could ever be drawn from her. Before 9 and by 10 o'clock, had had as much vinegar applied to her as would pickle a handsome salmon. I leave a discerning public to judge of my feelings when, under these untoward circumstances, at about 10:30, Master B.'s bell began to ring in the most infuriated manner, and Turk howled until the house resounded with his lamentations. I hope I may never again be in a state of mind so unchristian as the mental frame in which I lived for some weeks, respecting the memory of Master B, whether his bell was rung by rats or mice or bats or wind or what other accidental vibration, or sometimes by one causes, sometimes another, and sometimes by collusion. I don't know, but certain it is that it did not ring 2 nights out of 3 until I conceived the happy idea of twisting Mr. B.'s neck, in other words, breaking his bell short off, and silencing that young gentleman as to my experience with the belief forever. But by the time the odd girl had developed such improving powers of catalepsy that she had become a shining example of that very inconvenient disorder. She would stiffen, like a Guy Fawkes endowed with unreason. On the most irrelevant occasions, I would address the servants in a lucid manner, pointing out to them that I had painted Master B.'s room and balked the paper, and taken Master B.'s bell away, and balked the ringing. And if they could suppose that I, confounded boy, had lived and died to clothe himself with no better behavior than would most unquestionably have brought him and the sharpest particles of the birch broom into close acquaintance in the present imperfect state of existence, could they also suppose a mere poor human being such as I was capable by those contemptible means of counteracting and limiting the powers of the disembodied spirits of the dead, or of any spirits? I say it would become empathic and cogent, not to say rather complacent, in such an address, when it would all go for nothing by reason of the odd girl's suddenly stiffening from the toes upward and glaring among us like a parochial petrification. Streaker, the housemaid, too, had an attribute of the most discomfiting nature. I am able to say whether she was an unusually lymphatic temperament or what else was the matter with her, but this young woman became a mere distillery for the production of the largest and most transparent tears I had ever met with. Combined with these characteristics was a peculiar tendency of hold in the specimens, so that they didn't fall, but hung upon her face and nose. In this condition, and mildly and deplorably shaking her head in silence, would throw me more heavily than the admirable cretin could have done with a verbal disputation for the purse of money. Cook, likewise, always covered me with confusion, as with a garment, by neatly winding up the sessions with the protest that the use was wearing her out, and by meekly repeating her last wishes regarding her silver watch. As to our nightly life, the contagion of suspicion and fear was among us, and there was no such contagion under the sky. Hooded woman, according to the accounts, we were in a perfect convent with hooded women. Noises, with that contagion downstairs, I find myself have sat in the dismal parlor listening until I have heard so many and such strange noises that they would have chilled my blood if I had not warmed it by dashing out to make discoveries. Try this in bed, in the dead of the night. Try this at your own comfortable fireside in the life of the night. You can fill any house with noises, if you will, until you have a noise for every nerve in your nervous system. I repeat, the contagion of suspicion and fear was among us, and there was no such contagion under the sky. The women, their noses in a chronic state of exertation from smelling salts, were always primed and loaded for a swoon and ready to go off with hair triggers. The two elder detached the odd girl on all expeditions that were considered doubly hazardous, and she always established the reputation of such adventures by coming back catalytic. If Cook or Streaker went overhead after dark, we knew we should presently hear a bump on the ceiling, and this took place so consistently that it was as if a fighting man were engaged to go about the house, administering a touch of his art, which I believe is called the auctioneer, to every domestic he met with. It was in vain to do anything. It was in vain to be frightened for the moment in one's own person by real owl, and then to show the owl. It was in vain to discover by striking an accidental discord on the piano that turquoise howled at the particular notes and combinations. It was in vain to be Rhadamanthus with bells if an unfortunate bell rang without leave, I have it down inexorably and silence it. It was in vain to fire up chimneys, let torches down the well, charge furiously into suspected rooms and recesses. We changed servants, and it was no better. The new set ran away, and a third set came, and it was no better. At last our comfortable housekeeping got to be so disorganized and wretched that one night, dejectedly, said to my sister, "Patty, I begin to despair of our getting people to go on with us here, and I think we must give this up." My sister, who was a woman of immense spirit, replied, "No, John, don't give it up. Don't be beaten, John. There is another way." "And what is that?" said I. "John," returned my sister, "if we are not to be driven out of this house, and that for no reason whatever, that is apparent to you or me, we must help ourselves to take the house wholly and solely into our own hands." "But the servants," I said. "Have no servants," said my sister boldly, like most people in my guard of life. I had never thought of the possibility of going on without those faithful obstructions. The notion was so new to me that when suggested, that I looked very doubtful. "We know they come here to be frightened and infect one another, and we know they are frightened and do infect one another," said my sister. "With the exception of Bottles," I observed in the meditative tone. The deaf stableman, I kept him in my service and still keep him as a phenomenon of moroseness not to be matched in England. "To be sure, John," assented my sister, "except Bottles, and what does that go to prove? Bottles talks to nobody, and hears nobody unless he is absolutely roared at, and what alarm has Bottles ever given or taken? None." This was perfectly true, the individual in question having retired every night at 10 o'clock to his bed over the coach-house, with no other company than a pitchfork and a pail of water. That the pail of water would have been over me, and the pitchfork through me, if I ever put myself without announcement in Bottle's way. After that minute, I had disposited in my own mind as a fact worth remembering. Neither had Bottles ever taken at least notice of any of our many uproars. An imperturbable and speechless man, he had sat with his supper, with Streaker present, in a swoon and the odd girl marble, and had only put another potato in his cheek, or profited by the general misery to help himself to beefsteak pie. "And so," continued my sister, "I exempt Bottles, and considering, John, that the house is too large and perhaps too lonely to be kept well in hand by Bottles, you and me, I propose that we cast about among our friends for a certain selected number of the most reliable and willing, form a society here for 3 months, wait upon ourselves and one another, live cheerfully and socially to see what happens." I was so charmed with my sister that I embraced her on the spot, and went into her plan with the greatest ardor. We were then in the third week of our November, but we took our measures so vigorously, and were so well seconded by the friends in whom we confided, that there was still a week of the month unexpired, when our party all came down together merrily and mustered in the haunted house. I will mention in this place 2 small changes that had made while my sister and I were yet alone. It occurring to me as not improbable that Turk howled in the house at night, partially because he wanted to get out of it. I stationed him in his kennel outside, but unchained, and I seriously warned the village that any man who came this way must not expect to leave him without a rip of his own throat. I then casually asked Iki if he were a judge of a gun, on his saying, "Yes, sir, I knows a good gun when I sees her." I begged a favor of his stepping up to the house and looking at mine. "She's a true one, sir," said Iki, after inspecting a double-barreled rifle that I bought in New York a few years ago. "No mistake about her, sir." "Iki," said I, "don't mention it. I have seen something in this house." "No, sir?" he whispered, greedily opening his eyes. "Hooded lady, sir?" "Don't be frightened," I said. "It was a figure rather like you." "Lord, sir?" "Iki," said I, shaking hands with him warmly. I may say affectionately, if there is any truth in these ghost stories, the greatest service I can do you is to fire at that figure, and I promise you, by heaven and earth, I will do it with this gun if I see it again. The young man thanked me and took his leave with some little precipitation, after declining a glass of liquor. I imparted my secret to him because I had never quite forgotten his throwing his cap at the bell, because I had, on another occasion, noticed something very like a fur cap laying not far from the bell one night when it had burst out ringing, and because I had remarked that we were on our own ghostliness whenever he came up in the evening to comfort the servants. Let me do Iki no injustice. He was afraid of the house, and believed in this being haunted, and yet he would play false on the haunting side so surely as he got the opportunity. The odd girl's case was exactly similar. She went about the house in a state of real terror, and yet lied monstrously and wilfully, and invented many of the alarms she spread, and made many of the sounds we heard, and had my eye on the two, and I know it. It is not necessary for me here to account for this preposterous state of mind. I contented myself with remarking that it is familiarity known to every intelligent man who has had fair medical, legal, or other watchful experience, that it is well established and as common state of mind as any with which observers are acquainted, and that is one of the first elements above all others has rationally to be suspected in and strictly looked for and separated from any question of this kind. Take a pause. Hey, LB, haven't been sick in a hot minute. Can't catch my sick. Oh, I don't know. I didn't even think about it, Al. Yeah, if I can change it, I'll knock it down. Too sick to clean, just let them good night house. No, oh, they can clean the house, kids trash it when they get home. That happens. It's good to see you, Al. I hope you had a good Monday. This seems to be a classic ghost story. Bunch of people running about the house suspecting one another. Yeah, classic ghost story. Um, Give me 1 second, y'all. I just want to refill my coffee. Yeah, you can change whatever we want to do. Oh, okay. That's good to know. Too much about it. Is there such a thing, though? All right, bear with me 1 second, y'all. I'm going to get coffee, and I also have to check on one other thing real quick. Sorry. Anybody else drinking coffee tonight? Maybe tea? Let me know in the chat. What are you drinking tonight? If possible, not necessary. Just curious. Cool. All right. Water. Just set some hot peppermint tea to sleep. Let's go. What's up, Hungry Hollow? Mama Ghost, I hope you're doing well tonight. It's good to see you. Not as late now. Water and a little lime and mayo mixed together. You enjoy that, Al. I don't know why, but like that sounds. I don't know. It sounds interesting. But yes, I hope you're doing well, Mama Ghost. Hot dog water. I've seen you too, absolutely. I always love when you can come and catch a live, Mama. Everybody say hi to Mama Ghost. Al, this is my mom, LA Thunder. Diet Pepsi had 1 cup of coffee today, and my cup was 16 ounces. Let's go. All right. Let me just take a look here. All right. Coming on stream so I can compliment the beauty. Mama Ghost lives in Michigan, so when I do make my next trip up to Michigan here, which should be, I'm confidently going to say within the next 6 months at some point, I'll happily stream and bring Mama live with me. Sorry for the coffee slurp show. It's always good to have you here, Mama. All right, get some of the rust off these words here. To return to our party, the first thing we did when we were all assembled was to draw lots for bedrooms. That done, and every bedroom, and indeed the whole house, had been minutely examined by the whole party. We allotted the various household duties, as if we had been on a gypsy party or a yachting party or a hunting party or were shipwrecked. And then we recounted the floating rumors concerning the hooded lady, the owl, and Master B, with others, still more filmy, which had floated about during our occupation, relative to some ridiculous old ghost of the female gender who went up and down carrying the ghost of the round table, and also to the impalpable jackass whom nobody was ever able to catch. Some of these ideas I really believe our people below had communicated to one another in some diseased way, without conveying them in words. We then gravely called out one another to witness that we were not there to be deceived or to deceive, which we considered pretty much the same thing, and that, with the serious sense of responsibility, we would be strictly true to one another, and would strictly follow out of truth. And understanding was established that anyone who heard unusual noises in the night and who wished to trace them should knock at my door. Lastly, that on 12th night, the last night of Holy Christmas, all our individual experiences since that then present hour of our coming together in that haunted house should be brought to light for the good of all. and that we should hold our peace on the subject till then, unless on some remarkable provocation to break silence. We were, in numbers and in characters, as follows. First, to get my sister and myself out of the way, there we were, 2. In the drawing of lots, my sister drew her own room, and I drew Master B's. Next, there were our first cousin, John Herschel, so called after the great astronomer. Then, when I supposed a better man at a telescope does not breathe, with him was his wife, a charming creature, to whom he had been married in the previous spring. I thought it, under the circumstance, rather imprudent to bring her, because there was no knowing what even a false alarm may do in such a time. But I suppose he knew his own business best, and I must say that if she had been my wife, I never would have left her endearing and bright-faced behind. They drew the clock-room. Alfred Starling, an uncommonly agreeable young fellow of 8-and-20, for whom I have the greatest liking, was in the double room, mine, usually, and designated by that name from having a dressing room within it, with 2 large and cumbersome windows, which no wedges I was ever able to make would keep from shaking in any weather, wind or no wind. Alfred is a young fellow who pretends to be fast, another word for loose, and I understand the term, but who is much too good and sensible for that nonsense, and who would have distinguished himself before now, if his father had not unfortunately left him a small independence of 200 a year, on the strength of which his only occupation in life has been to spend 6. I am in hopes, however, that his banker may break, or that he may enter into some speculation guaranteed to pay 20%, for I am convinced that if he could only be ruined, his fortune is made. Belinda Bates, bosom friend of my sister and most intellectual, admirable, and delightful girl, got the picture room. She was a fine genius for poetry, combined with real business earnestness, and goes in, to use an expression of Alfred, for women's missions, women's rights, women's wrongs, and everything that is women's with a capital W, or is not and ought to be, or is ought and not to be. Most praiseworthy, my dear, and heaven prosper you, I whispered to her on the first night of my taking leave of her at the picture room door. But don't overdo it, in a respect of the great necessity there is, my darling, for more employments being within the reach of women than our civilization has yet to assign to her. Don't fly at the unfortunate man, even those men who are at first sight in your way, as if they were the natural oppressors of your sex, for, trust me, Belinda, they do sometimes spend their wages among wives and daughters, sisters, mothers, aunts, and grandmothers, and the play is, really, not all Wolf and Red Riding Hood, but has other parts of it. However, I digress. Belinda, as I have mentioned, occupied the picture room. We had but 3 other chambers, the corner room, the cupboard room, and the garden room. My old friend, Jack Governor, slung his hammock, as he called it, in the corner room. I have always regarded Jack as the finest-looking sailor that ever sailed. He is gray now, but as handsome as he was a quarter of a century ago. Nay, handsomer. A portly, cheery, well-built figure of a broad-shouldered man, with a frank smile and a brilliant dark eye and a rich eyebrow. I remember those under darker hair, and they looked all the better for the silver setting. He has been wherever his Union namesake flies, has Jack, and I have met old shipmates of his away in the Mediterranean, and on the other side of the Atlantic, who have beamed and brighted in the casual mention of his name, and have cried, "You know Jack Governor? Then you know a prince of men." That he is, and so unmistakably a naval officer, that if you were to meet him coming out of the Esquimaux snow hut in sealskin, you would have been vaguely persuaded he is full naval uniform. Jack once had that bright clear eye of his on my sister, but it fell out that he married another lady, and took her to South America, where she died. This was a dozen years ago or more. He brought down with him to our haunted house a little cask of salt beef, For he is always convinced that all salt beef not of his own pickling is mere carrion, and invariably, when he goes to London, packs a piece in his portmanteau. He had also volunteered to bring with him one Nat Beaver, an old comrade of his, captain of the merchantman, Mr. Beaver, with a thick-set wooden face and figure, and apparently as hard as a block all over, proved to be an intelligent man, with a world of watery experiences in him, and great practical knowledge. At times there were a curious nervousness about him, apparently the lingering result of some old illness, but it seldom lasted many minutes. He got the cupboard room, and lay there next to Mr. Undery, my friend and solicitor, who came down in an amateur capacity to go through with it, as he said, and who plays with better than the whole law list, from the red cover to the beginning of the red cover at the end. I never was happier in my life, and I believe it was the universal feeling among us. Jack Governor, always a man of wonderful resources, was chief cook, and made some of the best dishes I ever ate, including unapproachable curries. My sister was a pastry cook and a confectioner. Starling and I were cookmates, turn and turn about, and on a special occasion the chief cook, pressed Mr. Beaver. We had a great deal of outdoor sports and exercise, but nothing was neglected within, and there was no ill humor or misunderstanding among us. And our evenings were so delightful that we had at least one good reason to be reluctant to go to bed. Go Spencer, what's up, Heavy D? How you doing? Extra avocado, yeah. Bulbasaur got finished. We're actually building Squirtle now. So dropping on Thursday extra avocado. And we're gonna build the Squirtle. Uh, hmm. We had a few night alarms in the beginning. On the first night, I was knocked up by Jack with a most wonderful ship's lantern in his hand, like the gills of some monster in the deep, who informed me that he was going aloft to the main truck to have the weathercock down. It was a stormy night, and I remonstrated, but Jack called my attention to its making, a sound like a cry of despair, and said somebody would be hailing a ghost presently if it wasn't done. So, up to the top of the house, where I could hardly stand for the wind, we went, accompanied by Mr. Beaver, and there Jack, lantern and all, with Mr. Beaver after him, swarmed up to the top of the cupola, some 2 dozen feet above the chimneys, and stood upon nothing particular, coolly knocking the weathercock off until they both got into such good spirits with the wind and the height that I thought they would never come down. Another night they turned out again and had a chimney cowl off. Another night they cut a sobbing and gulping water pipe away. Another night they found out something else. On several occasions they both, in the coolest manner, simultaneously dropped out of their respective bedroom windows, hand over hand, by their counterpanes, to overhaul something mysterious in the garden. The engagement among us was faithfully kept, and nobody revealed anything. All we knew was, if anyone's room were haunted, no one looked the worse for it. That is the literal end of the first chapter of 2. Alice, it's good to see you, Alice. I hope you're doing well this fine Monday. Hope you're doing well this fine Monday, and we're going to get into the final chapter, The Ghost in Master B's Room. Ooh. So pretty much, to sum it up, there seems to be ghost enthusiast, and he certainly did seek out this house, and he brought a bunch of friends with him. Apparently they all like to cook, so that's something I noticed. And now strange things are happening. But right now, they're all suspecting one another, so nothing truly terrifying has happened yet. And I don't think anything truly terrifying per se will happen. The ghost in Master B's room. When I established myself in the triangular garret which had gained so distinguished a reputation, my thoughts naturally turned to Master B. My speculations about him were uneasy and manifold. Whether his Christian name was Benjamin Bisextile, from his having been born in a leap year, Bartholomew, or Bill, whether the initial letter belonged to his family name, or that was Baxter, Black, Brown, Baker, Buggins, Baker, or Bird, whether he was a foundling and had been baptized B, whether he was a lion-hearted boy and B was short for Britain or for Bull, whether he would possibly have been kinth or kin to an illustrious lady who brightened my own childhood and had come from the blood of the brilliant Mother Bunch. With these profitless meditations, I tormented myself much. I also carried the mysterious letter into the appearance and pursuits of the deceased, wondering whether he was dressed in blue, wore boots. He couldn't have been bald, as a boy of brains, liked books, and was good at bowling, had any skills as a boxer, even in his buoyant boyhood bathed from a bathing machine at Bangor, at Bognor, Bangor, Bournemouth, Brighton, or Broadstairs, like a bounding billiard ball. So from the first I was haunted by the letter B. It was not long before I remarked that I never by any hazard had a dream of Master B, or if anything belonging to him. But that instant I awoke from my sleep at whatever hour of the night, my thoughts took him up and roamed away, trying to attach his initial letter to something that would fit it and keep it quiet. For 6 nights I had been worried thus in Master B's room, when I began to perceive that things were going wrong. The first appearance that presented itself was early in the morning, when it was but just daylight and no more. I was standing shaving at my glass when I suddenly discovered, to my consternation and amazement, that I was shaving. Not myself, I'm 50, but a boy, apparently Master B. I trembled and looked over my shoulder, nothing there. I looked again at the glass and distinctly saw the features and the expression of a boy who was shaving, not to rid of a beard, but to get one. Extremely troubled in my mind, I took a few turns in the room and went back to the looking-glass, resolved to steady my hand and complete the operation at which I had been disturbed. Opening my eyes, which I had shut while recovering my firmness, I now met the glass, looking straight at me, the eyes of a young man of 4 or 5 and 20. Terrified by this new ghost, I closed my eyes and made a strong effort to recover myself. Opening them again, I saw, shaving his cheek in the glass, my father, who has long been dead. Nay, I even saw my grandfather too, whom I never did see in my life. Although naturally much affected by these remarkable visitations, I determined to keep my secret until the time agreed upon for the present general disclosure. Agitated by the multitude of curious thoughts, I retired to my room that night, prepared to encounter some new experience of the spectral character. Nor was my preparation needless, for, waking from my uneasy sleep at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, what were my feelings to find that I was sharing my bed with the skeleton of Master B! I sprang up, and the skeleton sprang up also, and then I heard a plaintive voice saying, "Where am I? What has become of me?" And, looking hard in that direction, perceived the ghost of Master B. The young spectre was dressed in an obsolete fashion, or rather, was not so much dressed as put into a case of inferior pepper and salt cloth made horrible by means of shining buttons. I observed that these buttons went, in a double row, over each other, of the young ghost, and appeared to descend his back. He wore a frill around his neck. His right hand, which I distinctly noted to be inky, was laid upon his stomach, connecting this action with some feeble pimples on his countenance and his general air of nausea. I concluded this ghost to be the ghost of a boy who had habitually taken a great deal too much medicine. "Where am I?" said the little spectre in a pathetic voice, "and why was I born in the colonial days, and why did I have to all that colonial given to me? And why did I have all that colonial given me?" I replied with sincere earnestness that upon my soul I couldn't tell him. "Where is my little sister?" said the ghost. "And where my angelic little wife? And where is the boy I went to school with?" I entreated the phantom to be comforted, and above all things to take heart respecting the loss of the boy he went to school with. I represented to him that probably that boy never did, within human experience, come out well when discovered. I urged that I myself had, in later life, turned up several boys whom I went to school with, and none of them had at all answered. I expressed my humble belief that the boy never did answer. I represented that he was a mystic character, a delusion, and a snare. I recounted how the last time I found him at a dinner party behind a wall of white cravat, with an inconclusive opinion on every possible subject, and a power of silent boredom absolutely titanic. I related how, on the strength of our having been together at old Doylance's, he had asked himself to breakfast with me, a social offence of the largest magnitude. How, feigning my weakness embers for belief in Doylance's boys, I had let him in, and how he had proved to be a fearful wanderer about the earth, pursuing the race of Adam with inexplicable notions concerning the currency, and with a proposition that the Bank of England should, on pain of being abolished, instantly strike off and circulate God knows how many thousands of millions of tens and sixpenny notes. The ghost heard me in silence, and with a fixed stare. "Barber!" It apostrophized me when I had finished. "Barber?" I repeated, for I am not that profession. "Condemned," said the ghost, "to shave a constant change of customers, now me, now a young man, now thyself as thou art, now thy father, now thy grandfather, condemned too to lie down with the skeleton every night, and to rise with it every morning." I shuddered on hearing this dismal announcement. "Barber, pursue me!" I had felt, even before the words were uttered, that I was under a spell to pursue the phantom. I immediately did so, and was in Master B.'s room no longer. Most people know what long and fatiguing night journeys had been forced upon the witches who used to confess, and who no doubt told the exact truth. Particularly as they were always assisted with leading questions, and the torture was always ready, I asseverate that, during my occupation of Master B.'s room, I was taken by the ghost that haunted it, on expeditions fully as long and wild as any of those. Assuredly, I was presented to no shabby old man with a goat's horn and a tail, something between Pan and the old clothsman, holding conventional receptions as stupid as those real life and less decent. But I came upon other things which appeared to me to have more meaning. Confident that I speak the truth and shall be believed, I declare without hesitation that I followed the ghost, in the first instance on the broomstick, and afterwards on a rocking horse. The very smell of the animal's paint, especially when I brought it out, by making him warm, I am ready to swear to. I followed the ghost afterward, in a hackney coach, an institution with a peculiar smell of which the presented generation is unacquainted, but to which I am again ready to swear as a combination of stable, dog with his mange, and very old billows. In this I appeal the previous generations to confirm or refute me. I pursued the phantom, on a headless donkey, at least upon a donkey who was so interested in the state of his own stomach that his head was always down there, investigating it, on ponies, especially born to kick up behind, on roundabouts and swings, from fairs, and the first cab, another forgotten institution where the fare regularly got into bed and was tucked up with the driver. Not to trouble you with a detailed account of all my travels in pursuit of the ghost Master B, which were no longer, which were longer and more wonderful than those of Sinbad and the Sailor. Sinbad, the Sailor. I will confine myself to one experience from which you may judge of many. I was marvelously changed. I was myself, yet not myself. I was conscious of something within me which had been the same all through my life, and which I have always recognized under all its phases and varieties as never altering. And yet I was not the I who had gone to bed in Master B's room. I had the smoothest of faces and the shortest of legs, and I had taken another creature like myself, also with the smoothest of faces and the shortest of legs, behind a door, and was confiding to him a proposition a proposition of the most astounding nature. This proposition was that we should have a seraglio? Seraglio. Seraglio. The other creature assented warmly. He had no notion of respectability, neither had I. It was the custom of the East. It was the way of the good Caliph Harun Arashid. Let me have that corrupted name again for once, as it so scented with sweet memories. The usage was highly laudable, and most worthy of imitation. Oh, yes, let us, said the other creature with a jump, have a seraglio. It was not because we entertained the faintest doubts of the meritorious character of the Oriental establishment we proposed to import, that we perceived it must be kept a secret from Miss Griffin. It was because we knew Miss Griffin to be bereft of human sympathies and incapable of appreciating the greatness of the great Haroun. Mystery, impenetrably shrouded from Miss Griffin then, let us entrust it to Miss Buell. We were 10 in Miss Griffin's establishment, by Hampstead Ponds, 8 ladies and 2 gentlemen. Miss Buell, whom I judged to have attained the ripe age of 8 or 9, took the lead in society. I opened the subject to her in the course of the day, and proposed that she should become the favorite. Miss Buell, after struggling with the diffidence so natural to and charming in her adorable sex, expressed herself as flattered by the idea, but wished to know how it was proposed to provide for Miss Pipson. Miss Buell, who was understood to have vowed towards the young lady a friendship halves and no secrets until death, on the church services and lessons complete in 2 volumes with case and lock. Miss Buell said she could not, as the friend of Pipson disguised from herself, or me, that Pipson was not one of the common. Now, Miss Pipson, having curly hair and blue eyes, which was my idea of anything mortal and feminine that was called fair, I promptly replied that I regarded Miss Pipson in the light of the fair circation? And what then? Miss Buell pensively asked. Still here, loving the stories, guy. Oh, thank you, Miss Lovejoy. Appreciate that. Appreciate the link drop, y'all. Ancient Mew, how you doing, man? I replied that she must be inveigled by a merchant, brought to me veiled, and purchased as a slave. The other creature had already fallen into the second male place in the state, and was set apart from the Grand Vizier. He afterwards resisted the disposal of events, but had his hair pulled until he yielded. Shall I not be jealous? Miss Buell inquired, casting down her eyes. Zobeide, no, I replied. You will ever be the favorite sultana The first place in my heart and on my throne will be ever yours." Miss Buell, upon that assurance, consented to propound the idea to her 7 beautiful companions, it occurring to me in the course of the same day that we knew we could trust a grinning and good-natured soul called Tabby, who was the serving drudge of the house, and had no more figure than one of the beds, and upon whose face there was always more or less black lead. I slipped into Mrs. Buell's hand after supper a little note to that effect, dwelling on the black lead as being a manner of deposited by the finger of Providence, pointing Tabby out for Monsieur, the celebrated chief of the blacks of the harem. How did we get here? There were difficulties in the formation of the desired institution, as there are in all combinations. The other creature showed himself of a low character, and when defeated in aspiring to the throne, pretended to have conscientious scruples about prostrating himself before Caliph, wouldn't call him commander of the faithful, spoke of him slightly and inconsistently as a mere chap, said he, the other creature, wouldn't play, and was otherwise coarse and offensive. This meanness of disposition was, however, put down by the general indignation of the united seraglio, and I became blessed in the smiles of 8 of the fairest of the daughters of men. The smiles could only be bestowed when Miss Griffin was looking another way, and only then in a very wary manner, for there was a legend among the followers of the prophet that she saw, with the little round ornament in the middle of the pattern on the back of her shawl. But every day after dinner for an hour we were all together, and then the favorite and the rest of the royal harem competed who should most beguile the leisure of the serene Haroun reposing from the cares of state, which were generally, as in most affairs of state, in the arithmetical character, the commander of the faithful being the fearful boggler at a sum. On these occasions he devoted Monsieur, chief of the blacks of the harem, was always in attendance, Miss Griffin usually ringing for that officer, at the same time with great vehemence, but never acquitted himself in a manner worthy of his historical reputation. In the first place, his bringing a broom into the divan of the Caliph, when the Haroun wore on his shoulders a red robe of anger, Miss Pipson's plissé, though it might be got over for a moment, was never to be quite satisfactorily accounted for. In the second place, his breaking out into grinning explanations of, "Lork, you purties," was neither Eastern nor respectful. In the third place, when specially instructed to say Bismillah, he always said Hallelujah. This officer, unlike his class, was too good-humored altogether, kept his mouth open for far too wide, expressed approbation to the incredulous extent, and even once, it was on occasion of the purchase of the fair Circassian for 500,000 purses of gold, and cheap too, embraced the slave and favorite and the Caliph all round. Parenthetically, let me say, God bless Monsieur, and may there have been sons and daughters on that tender bosom, softening many a hard day since. Miss Griffin was a model of prosperity. Propriety, and I am at a loss to imagine what the feelings of the virtuous woman would have been if she had known, when she paraded us down the Hampstead Road 2 and 2, that she was walking with the stately step at the head of polygamy and Mohammedanism. I believe that a mysterious and terrible joy with which the contemplation of Miss Griffin in this unconscious state inspired us, in a grim sense prevalent among us that there was a dreadful power in our knowledge of what Miss Griffin, who knew all things that could be learnt out of a book, didn't know, were the mainspring of the preservation of our secret. It was wonderfully kept, but was once upon the verge of self-betrayal. The danger had escaped occurred upon a Sunday. We were all 10 ranged in a conspicuous part of the gallery at church, with Miss Griffin at our head, as we were every Sunday, advertising that establishment in an unsecular sort of way. When the description of Solomon and his domestic glory happened to be read, the moment that monarch was thus referred to, conscience whispered to me, "Thou too, Haroun?" The officiating minister had cast his eye and assisted conscience by giving him the appearance of reading personally at me. A crimson blush, attended by a fearful perspiration, suffused my features. The Grand Vizier became more dead than alive, and the whole seraglio reddened as if the sunset of Baghdad shone directly upon their lovely faces. At this portentous time of the awful Griffin rose and balefully surveyed the children of Islam. My own impression was that Church and State had entered into a conspiracy with Miss Griffin to expose us, and that we should all be put into white sheets and exhibited in the central aisle. But so westerly, if I may be allowed to express the opposite to Eastern associations, was Miss Griffin's sense of rectitude that she merely suspected apples, and we were saved. Stress melts away in here. I appreciate that. Best Monday ever. Appreciate you, Rafa. I'm sorry, y'all. Frankly, I'm not sure how we got here, but as I mentioned, these are excerpts from books, so I imagine all these people were in it at some point, and we're just kind of reading through it. I'm going to finish it because I'm almost done with it, but just wanted to throw that out there. This is getting wild. I have called the seraglio united upon the question solely whether the commander of the faithful durst to exercise a right of kissing in that sanctuary of the palace where its peerless inmates divided. Zobeide asserted a counter right in the favorite to scratch, and the fair Circassian put her face for refuge into the green baize bag, originally designed for books. On the other hand, a young antelope of transcendent beauty from the fruitful plains of Camden Town, when she had been brought by traders in that half-yearly caravan that crossed the intermediate desert after the holidays, held more liberal opinions, but stipulated for limiting the benefit of them to that dog and son of a dog, the Grand Vizier, who had no rights and was not in question at length. The difficulty was compromised by the installation of a very youthful slave as deputy. She, raised upon a stool, officially received upon her cheeks the salutes intended by the gracious Haroun for other sultanas, and was privately rewarded from the coffers of the ladies of the harem. And now it was at the full height of enjoyment of my bliss that I became heavenly troubled. I began to think of my mother, and what she would say to my taking home at midsummer 8 of the most beautiful of the daughters of men. But all unexpected. I thought of the number of beds we'd made up at our house, of my father's income, and of the banker, and my despondency redoubled. The seraglio and malicious vizier, divining the cause of their lord's unhappiness, did their utmost to augment it. They professed unbounded fidelity, and declared that they would live and die with him. Reduced to the utmost wretchedness by those uh, protestations of attachment, I lay awake for hours at a time, ruminating on my frightful lot. In my despair, I think I might have taken an early opportunity of falling on my knees before Mrs. Griffin, avowing my resemblance to Solomon, and praying to be dealt with according to the outraged laws of my country, if an unthought of means of escape had not opened before me. One day we were out walking two and two, on which occasion the vizier had his usual instructions to take note of the boy at the turnpike, and if he profanely gazed, which he always did, at the beauties of the harem, to have him bowstrung in the course of the night. And it happened that our hearts were veiled in gloom. An unaccountable action on the part of an antelope had plunged the state into disgrace. That charmer, on the representation that the previous day was her birthday, and that vast treasures had been sent in a hamper for his celebration, both baseless assertions, and secretly, but most pressingly invited 35 neighboring princes and princesses to a ball and supper, with a special stipulation that they were not to be fetched till 12. This wandering of the antelope's fancy led to the surprising arrival at Miss Griffin's door, in divers equipages and under various escorts, of a great company in full dress who were disposited on the top step in a flush of high expectancy, and who were dismissed in tears. At the beginning of the double knocks attendance on these ceremonies, the antelope had retired to the back attic and bolted herself in. And at every new arrival, Miss Griffin had gone so much more and more distracted, that at last she had been seen to tear her front, ultimately capitulation on the part of the offender, and had been followed by solitude in the linen closet, bread and water, and a lecture to all, of vindictive length, in which Miss Griffin had used expressions. Firstly, I believe you all of you knew of it. Secondly, every one of you is as wicked as the other. Thirdly, a pack of little wretches. Under these circumstances, we were walking dearly along, and I, especially with my Mussulman responsibilities heavy on me, was in a very low state of mind, when a strange man accosted Miss Griffin, and after walking on at her side for a little while and talking with her, looked at me, supposing him to be a mission of the law, and that my hour was come. I instantly ran away, with the general purpose of making for Egypt. The whole seraglio cried out when they saw me making off as fast as my legs would carry me. I had an impression that the first turning on the left and round by the public house would be the shortest way to get to the pyramids. Miss Griffin screamed after me, the faithless vizier ran after me, and the boy at the turnpike dodged me into a corner like a sheep and cut me off. Nobody scolded me when I was taken and brought back. Miss Griffin only said, with a stunning gentleness, this was very curious. Why had I run away when the gentleman looked at me? If I had any breath to answer with, I dare say I should have made no answer. Having no breath, I certainly made none. Miss Griffin and the strange man took me between them, and walked me back to the palace in a sort of state, but not all, as I couldn't help but feeling with astonishment in culprit state. When we got there, we went into the room by ourselves, and Miss Griffin called in to her assistants. Mesrar, chief of the dusky guards of the harem, Monsieur, on being whispered to, began to shed tears. Bless you, my precious, said that officer, turning to me. Your pa's took bitter bad. I asked with a fluttered heart, is he very ill? Lord temper the wind to you, my lamb, said the good monsieur, kneeling down, and I might have had a comforting shoulder for my head to rest on. Your pa's dead. Harun al-Rashid took me to flight at the words. The seraglio vanished. From that moment I never again saw one of the 8 of the fairest of daughters of men. I was taken home, and there was debt at home as well as death, and we had a sale there. My own little bed was so superstitiously looked upon by the power unknown to me, hazy called the trade, that the brass coal scuttle, a roasting jack, and a birdcage were obliged to be put in to make a lot of it. And then it went for a song. So I heard mentioned, and I wondered what song, and thought what a dismal song it must have been to sing. Then I was sent to a great cold bare school of big boys where everything to eat and wear was thick and clumpy, without ever being enough, where everybody large and small was cruel, where the boys knew all about the sale before I got there, and asked me what I had fetched, and who had brought me, who had bought me, and hooted at me, "Going, going, gone!" I never whispered in that wretched place that I had been Haroun, or had a seraglio, for I know that if I mentioned my reverses, I should be so worried that I should have to drown myself in the muddy pond near the playground, which looked like a beer. Ah me, no other ghost has haunted the boy's room, my friend, since I had occupied it. Then the ghost of my own childhood, the ghost of my own innocence, the ghost of my own airy belief. Many a time have I pursued the phantom, never with this man's stride of mine to come up with it, never with these man's hands of mine to touch it, never more to this man's heart of mine to hold in it its purity. And here you see me working out, as cheerfully and thankfully as I may, my doom of shaving in the glass, a constant change of customers, and a lying down and rising up with the skeleton allotted to me for my mortal companion. I appreciate that, Adam Jones. Truly I do. And that was it. That was it. So I apologize if it was hard to follow. If the story got a little lost and muddled, it was just about a guy searching for ghosts. But of course, sometimes the stories we can't follow are always the easiest to listen to, at least in my opinion. And I didn't realize that was going to take almost 2 hours to read. So let me take a look at this real quick. But yeah, of course, we're going to keep going because there's 3 ghost stories here. We might not get through all 3, but I'll certainly try and make it through the second one, which is the Signal Man. The Signal Man. Hello, below there. When he heard a voice thus calling to him, he was standing at the door of his box, with a flag in his hand, furled around its short pole. One would have thought, considering the nature of the ground, that he could not have doubted from what quarter the voice came. But instead of looking up to where I stood at the top of the steep cutting nearly over his head, he turned himself about and looked down the line. There was something remarkable in his manner of doing so, though I could not have said for the life what. But I know it was remarkable enough to attract my notice, even though his figure was foreshortened and shadowed down in the deep trench, and mine was high above him, so steeped with the glow of an angry sunset, that I had shaded my eyes with my hand before I saw him at all. Halloa below! From looking down the line, he turned himself about again, and raising his eye, saw my figure high above him. "Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you?" He looked up at me without replying, and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle question. Just then there came a vague vibration of the earth in the air, quickly changing into a violent pulsation, and an oncoming rush that caused me to start back as though it had forced me to draw me down. When such vapor as rose to my height from this rapid train had passed me, I was skimming away over the landscape. I looked down again and saw him refurling the flag he had shown while the train went by. I repeated my inquiry after a pause during which seemed to regard me with a fixed attention. He motioned with his rolled-up flag toward a point on my level, some 200 or 300 yards distant. I called down to him, "All right!" and made for that point. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough zigzag descending path notched down, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone and became oozier and wetter as I went down. For these reasons, I found the way long enough to give me time to recall a singular air of reluctance or compulsion with which he had pointed out the path. When I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him again, I saw that he was standing between the rails, on the way by which the train had lately passed, in an attitude as if he were waiting for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand crossed over his breast. His attitude was one of such expectation and watchfulness that I stopped a moment wondering at it. I resumed my downward way, and stepping out upon the level of the railroad, and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a dark, sallow man with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side, a dripping wet wall of jagged stone, excluding all view but a strip of sky. The perspective one way only a crooked prolongation of this great dungeon, the shorter perspective in this the other direction terminating in a gloomy red light, and the gloomier entrance to the black tunnel, in which massive architecture there was a barbarous, depressing, and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to the spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck chill to me as if I had left the natural world. Before he stirred, I was near enough to him to have touched him. Not even then, removing his eyes from mine, he stepped back one step and lifted his hand. It was a lonesome post to occupy, I said, and it had riveted my attention when I looked down from up yonder. A visitor was a rarity, I should suppose, not an unwelcome rarity, I hoped. In me, he merely saw a man who had been shut up within narrow limits all his life, and who, being at least set free by the newly awakened interest in these great works, to such purpose, I spoke to him, but I am far from sure of the terms I used, for besides that I am not happy in opening any conversation. There was something in the man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards me, the red light near the tunnel's mouth, and looked all about it, as if something were missing from it. Then he looked at me. That light was part of his charge? Was it not? He answered in a low voice. Don't you know it is? The monstrous thought came to my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face, that this was a spirit, not a man. I had speculated since whether there may have been infection in his mind. In my turn, I stepped back, but in making the action, I detected in his eyes some latent fear of me, and put his monstrous thought to flight. This put the monstrous thought to flight. You look at me, I said, forcing a smile, as if you had a dread of me. I was doubtful, he returned, whether I had seen you before. Where? He pointed to the red light he had looked at. There, I said. I'm sorry. There? I said. Intently watching of me, he replied, but without sound. Yes. My good fellow, what should I do there? However, be that as it may, I never was there, you may swear. I think I may, he rejoined. Yes, I am sure I may. His manner cleared like my own. He replied to my remarks with readiness and in well-chosen words. He had much to do there, yes? That was to say, he had enough responsibilities to bear, but exactness and watchfulness were what was required of him, and of actual work. Manual labor he had next to none. To change that signal, to trim those lights, and to turn his iron handle now and then, was all he had to do under that head. Regarding those many long and lonely hours of which I seemed to make so much, he could only say that the routine of his life had shaped itself into that form, and that he had grown used to it. He had taught himself a language down here, if only to know it by sight, and to have formed his own crude ideas of its pronunciation. Could be called learning it. He had also worked at fractions and decimals and tried a little algebra, but he was, and had been as a boy, a poor hand at figures. It was necessary for him, when on duty, always to remain in that channel of damp air, and could he never rise into the sunshine from between those high stone walls? Why, that depended on times and circumstances. Under some conditions there would be less upon the line than under others, and the same held good as to certain hours of the day and night. In bright weather he did choose occasions for getting a little above those lower shadows, but being at all times liable to be called by his electric bell, and at such times listening for it when he redoubled anxiety, and relief was less than I would suppose. He took me to his box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial, face, and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoke. On my trusting that he would excuse the remark that he had been well educated, and I hoped I might say without offence, perhaps educated above that station, he observed that instances of slight incongruity in such wise would rarely be found wanting among large bodies of men; that he had heard it was so in the workhouses, in the police force, even in that last desperate resource, the army; and that he knew it was so more or less in any great railway staff. He had been, when young, if I could believe it, sitting in that hut, he scarcely could, a student of natural philosophy, and had attended lectures. But he had run wild, misused his opportunities, gone down, and never risen again. He had no complaint to offer about it. He had made his bed, and he lay upon it. It was far too late to make another. What's up, Linta? Hope you're doing well, fan. Hey, I appreciate that. Oh, good night, Mama. I love you too. I appreciate you popping in, as always. And I'm glad I can help you all relax. There's 12 of you in here. Really appreciate you guys. Oh, I appreciate that, Miss Lovejoy. I am too. There's a little picture here. Come on, come on, come on. There we go. Picture of art. All that I have here condensed, he said, in a quiet manner, with his grave, dark regards divided between me and the fire. He threw in the word "sir" from time to time, and especially when he referred to his youth, as though to request me to understand that he claimed to be nothing but what I found him. He was several times interrupted by the little bell, and had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand without the door and display the flag as the train passed by and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the discharge of his duties I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at the syllable and remaining silent until what he had to do was done. In a word, I should have set this man down as one of the safest men to be employed in that capacity, but for the circumstance that while he was speaking to me, he twice broke off with a falling color, turning his face towards the little bell when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut, which he kept shut to exclude the unhealthy damp, and looked out towards the red light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both of those occasions he came back to the fire with an inexplicable air upon him which I had remarked without being able to define when we were so far asunder. Said I, when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think that I have met with a contented man." I am afraid I must acknowledge that I said it to lead him on. "I believe I used to be so," he rejoined in a low voice in which he had first spoken. "But I am troubled, sir, I am troubled." He He would have recalled the words if he could. He had said them, however, and I took them up quickly. With what? What is your trouble? It is very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you. But I especially intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be? I go off early in the morning, and I shall be here on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir. I will come at 11. He thanked me and went out the door with me. I'll show my white light, sir, he said in a peculiar low voice, till you have found the way up. When you have found it, don't call out, and when you're at the top, don't call out. His manner seemed to make the place strike colder to me, but I said no more than, very well. And when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, "Halloa below there," tonight? Heaven knows, said I. I cried something to that effect. Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well. Admit those were the very words. I said them, no doubt, because I saw you below. For no other reason. What other reason could I possibly have? You had no feelings that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way. No. He wished me good night and held up his light. I walked by the side of the down line of rails, with a very disagreeable sensation of a train coming behind me, until I found a path. It was easier to mount than to descend, and I got back to my inn without any adventure. Punctual to my appointment, I placed my foot at the first notch of the zigzag next night. As the distant clocks were striking 11, he was waiting for me at the bottom, with his white light on. I have not called out, I said when we came close together. May I speak now? By all means, sir. Good night, then, and here's my hand. Good night, sir, and here's mine. With that, we walked side by side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. I have made up my mind, sir, he began, bending forward as soon as we were seated, and speaking in a tone but a little above a whisper, that you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me. That mistake? No, that's someone else. Who is it? I don't know. Like me? I don't know. I never saw the face. The left arm is across the face, and the right arm is waved, violently waved, this way. I followed his action with my eyes, and it was the action of an arm gesticulating with the utmost passion and vehemence. For God's sakes, clear the way. One moonlight night, said the man, I was standing here when I heard a voice cry, Halloa below there. I started up, looked from that door, and saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving as I just now showed you. The voice seemed hoarse with shuddering, and it cried out, Look out! Look out! And then again, Halloa below there! Look out! I caught up my lamp, turned it on red, and ran towards the figure, calling, What's wrong? What has happened? Where? It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close upon it that I wondered at its keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up to it and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away when it was gone. Into the tunnel? Said I. No. I ran on into the tunnel 500 yards. I stopped. I held my lamp above my head, and I saw the figures of the measured distance. I saw the wet stains stealing down the walls and trickling through the arch. I ran out again faster than I had run in, for I am mortal abhorrence of the place upon me. And I looked all around the red light with my own red light, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and I came down again and ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong? The answer came back both ways. All is well. Resisting the slow touch of a frozen finger tracing on my spine, I showed him how that this figure must be a deception of his senses of sight, and how that figure, originating in disease of the delicate nerves that minister to the functions of the eye, were known to have often troubled patients, some of whom had become conscious of the nature of their affliction and had even proved it by experiments upon themselves. As to an imaginary cry, said I, but do listen for a moment to the wind in the unnatural valley while we speak so low, and to the wild harp it makes of the telegraph wire. That was all very well, he returned, after he had sat listening for a while, and had ought to know something of the wind and the wires. He who so often passed long winter nights there alone and watching. But he would beg to remark that he had not finished. I asked his pardon, and he slowly added these words, touching my arm. Within 6 hours after the appearance, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the dead and wounded were brought along through the tunnel over the spot where the figure had stood. A disagreeable shudder crept over me, but I did my best against it. It was not to be denied, I rejoined, that this was a this was a remarkable coincidence, calculated deeply to impress his mind. But it was unquestionable that remarkable coincidences did continually occur, and they must be taken into account in dealing with such a subject. Though, to be sure, I must admit, I added, for I thought I saw that he was going to bring the objection to bear upon me. Men of common sense did not allow much for coincidences in making the ordinary calculations of life. He again begged me to remark that he had not finished. I again begged his pardon for being betrayed into interruptions. This, he said, again laying his hand upon my arm and glancing over his shoulder with hollow eyes, was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed, and I had recovered from the surprise and shock when one morning, as the day was breaking, I, standing at the door, looked towards the red light and saw the spectre again. He stopped, with a fixed look at me. Did it cry out? No, it was silent. Did it wave its arm? No, it leaned against the shaft of the light with both hands before the face, like this. Once more I followed his action with my eyes. It was the action of mourning. I had seen an attitude in stone figures on tombs. Did you go up to it? I came in and sat down, partially to collect my thoughts, partially because it had turned me faint. When I went to the door again, daylight was above me, and the ghost was gone. But nothing followed, nothing came of this. He touched me on the arm with his forefinger twice or thrice, giving a ghastly nod each time. That very day, as a train came out of the tunnel, I noticed, at a carriage window on my side, what looked like a confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I saw it just in time to signal the driver. Stop! He shut off and put his brake on, but the train drifted past me 150 yards or more. I ran after it, and as I went along, heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful young lady had died instantaneously in one of the compartments, and was brought in here and laid down on this floor between us. Involuntarily, I pushed my chair back as I looked from the boards at which he pointed to himself. True, sir, true, precisely as it happened, so I tell you. I could think of nothing to say to any purpose, and my mouth was very dry. The wind and the wires took up the story with the long, lamenting wail. He resumed. Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a week ago. Ever since, it has been there, now and again, by fits and starts. And the light? And the danger light? What does it seem to do? He repeated, if possible, with increased passion and vehemence, the former gesticulation of, For God's sakes, clear the way! Then he went on, I have no peace or rest for it. It calls to me for many minutes together, in an agonized manner. "Below there! Look out! Look out!" It stands waving to me. It rings my little bell. I caught at that. "Did it ring your bell yesterday evening when I was here? And you went to the door?" "Twice." "Why, see," said I, "how your imagination misleads you. My eyes were on the bell and my ears were open to the bell. And if I am a living man, it did not ring at those times. No, nor at any other times except when it was rung in the natural, of course, of physical things by the station communicating with you." He shook his head. "I have never made a mistake as to that yet, sir. I have never confused a spectre's ring with that man's, with the man's. The ghost's ring is a strange vibration in the bell that it derives from nothing else, and I have not asserted that the bell stirs to the eye. I don't wonder that you failed to hear it, but I heard it." "And did the spectre seem to be out there when you looked?" "It was there." "Both times?" He repeated firmly. "Both times." "Will you come to the door with me and look for it now?" He bit his underlip, as though he were somewhat unwilling, but arose. I opened the door and stood on the step while he stood in the doorway. There was the danger light. There was the dismal mouth of the tunnel. There was the high, wet stone walls of the cutting. There were the stars above them. "Do you see it?" I asked him, taking particular note of his face. His eyes were prominent and strained, but not very much more so, perhaps, than my own had been when I directed them earnestly towards the same spot. "No," he whispered, or he answered. "It is not there." "Agreed," said I. We went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I was thinking how best to improve this advantage, if it might be called one, when he took up the conversation in such a matter-of-course way, so assuming that there could be no serious question of fact between us, that I felt myself placed in the weakest of positions. "By this time you will fully understand, sir," he said, "that what troubles me so dreadfully is the question, what does the spectre mean?" I was not sure, I told him, that I did fully understand. "What is its warning against?" he said, ruminating, with his eyes on the fire and only by times turning them on me. "What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger overhanging somewhere on the line. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted this third time, after what has gone before. But surely this is a cruel haunting of me. What can I do?" He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the drops from his heated forehead. "If I telegraph danger on either side of me, or on both, I can give no reason for it," he went on, wiping the palms of his hands. "I should get into trouble, and do no good. They would think I was mad. This is the way it would work. Message, danger, take care, answer, what danger, where, message, don't know, but for God's sakes, take care. They would displace me. What else could they do?" His pain of mind was more pitiable to see. It was the mental torture of the conscientious man, oppressed beyond endurance by the unintelligent responsibility involving life. "When it first stood under the danger light," he went on, putting his dark hair back from his head, and drawing his hands outward across his temples in an extremity of feverish stress. "Why not tell where the accident was to happen, if it must happen? Why not tell me how it could be averted, if it could be averted? When on the second coming it hit its face, why not let me see instead? She is going to die. Let them keep her at home. If it came on those two occasions only to show me that this warnings were true, and so to prepare me for the third, why not warn me plainly now? And I, Lord help me, a mere poor signalman on the solitary station, why not go to somebody with credit to be believed and power to act? When I saw him in this state, I saw that for a poor man's sake, as well as for public safety, what I had to do for the time was to compose his mind. Therefore, setting aside all question of reality or unreality between us, I represented to him that whoever thoughtfully discharged his duty must do well, and that at least it was his comfort that he understood his duty. Though he did not understand these confounding appearances, in this effort I succeeded far better than the attempt to reason him out of his conviction. He became calm, the occupations incidental to his post, as the night advance began to make larger demands of his attention. I left him at 2 in the morning, and had offered to stay through the night, but he would not hear of it. That I more than once looked back at the red light, and as I ascended the pathway, that I did not like the red light, and that I should have slept but poorly if my bed had been under it. I see no reason to conceal, nor did I like the two sequences of the accident and the dead girl. I see no reason to conceal that either. But what ran most in my thoughts was the consideration, how ought I to act, having become the recipient of this disclosure? I had proved the man to be intelligent, vigilant, painstaking, and exact, but how long might he remain so in his state of mind? Though in a subordinate position, still he held a most important trust, and would I, for instance, like to stake my own life on the chances of his continuing to execute it with precision? Unable to overcome a feeling that there would be something treacherous in my communicating what he had told me to his superiors in the company, without first being plain with himself and proposing a middle course to him, I ultimately resolved to offer to accompany him, otherwise keeping a secret for the present, to the wisest medical practitioner we could hear of in those parts, and, to take his opinion, a change in his time of duty would come around next night. He had apprised me, and he would be off an hour or two after sunrise and on again soon after sunset. I had appointed to return accordingly. Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out nearly to enjoy it. The sun was not yet quite down when I traversed the field path under the top of the deep cutting. I would extend my walk for an hour, I said to myself, half an hour on, half an hour back, and it would then be time to go to my signalman's house. Before pursuing my stroll, I stepped down the brink and mechanically looked down from this point from which I had first seen him. I cannot describe the thrill that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man, with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a moment, for in a moment I saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was a little group of other men standing at a sort of distance, to whom he seemed to be rehearsing the gesture he made. The danger light was not yet lighted. Against its shaft a little low hut, entirely new to me, had been made of some wooden supports and tarpaulin. It looked no bigger than a bed. When an irresistible sense that something was wrong, with the flashing self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come of my leaving the man there, and causing no one to be sent to overlook or correct what he had done, I descended the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What is the matter?" I asked the man. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to that box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know?" "You will recognize him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head, and rising an end to the tarpaulin, for his face is quite composed. "Oh, how did it happen? How did this happen?" I asked, turning from one to another as the hut closed again. "He was cut down by an engine, sir. No man in England knew his work better, but somehow he was not clear of the outer rail. It was just at broad day. He had struck the light and had the lamp at his hand, and the engine came out of the tunnel. His back was towards her, and she cut him down. That man drove her, and was showing how it happened. Show the gentleman, Tom." The man, who wore a rough dark dress, stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. "Coming round the curve in the tunnel, sir," he said. "I saw him at the end, like as if I saw him down a perspective glass. There was no time to check speed, and I knew him to be very careful. As I didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off, and we were running down upon him." and I called to him as loud as I could call. What did you say? I said, "Below there, look out, for God's sakes, clear the way." I started. It was a dreadful time, sir. I never left off calling to him. I put this arm before my eyes not to see, and I waved my arm at last, but there was no use. Without prolonging the narrative to dwell on any one of its curious circumstances more than on any other, I may, in closing it, point out that the coincidence that the warning of the engine driver included not only the words which the unfortunate signal man had repeated to me as haunting him, but also the words which I myself, not he, had attached, and that only in my mind, to the gesticulation he had been imitated. Ooh, creepy. Hey, what's up, Ernie? Hope you're doing well, brother. Oh, Lori. Yes, best of luck with work tomorrow. I hope you have a beautiful night. Sleep well. Johnny Knight, how's it going? It's good to see you. I hope everybody's doing well. We're just getting into ghost stories. And that was a pretty good ghost story. I'm not gonna lie. I like that one. The Signal Man. All right. All right. So what I do want to do first, I should probably look at this. Yeah, let me do this. Felt more cool. Yeah, that one felt more put together. You can definitely tell the difference in years from Mr. Dickens. Cards won. Let's go, cards. All right, y'all. How many we got here? We got 13 of y'all in here. Totally up to y'all. We're going to do this. Well, I finished my coffee. I agree. I agree. There's only one more story in here, and it's called The Trial for Murder. Nice. Gotta love it. Yep, that's a good score right there. All right, well, looks like looks like we got 5 votes in, and they're all yes. You guys are sweet. I appreciate you guys. All right, we'll do this last one. Unless the other 6 people in here decide no. But we'll do this last one. That's what I like to hear. I love breaking the streaks. Let's hope this one's a little more cohesive also. The Trial for Murder. I have always noticed a prevalent want of courage, even among persons of superior intelligence and culture, as to imparting their own psychological experiences when those have been of a strange sort. Almost all men are afraid of what they could relate in such wise would find no parallel or response to the listener's internal life. and might be suspected or laughed at. A truthful traveler, who should have seen some extraordinary creature in the likeness of a sea serpent, would have no fear of mentioning it. But in the same traveler, having had some singular presentiment, impulse, vagarity of thought, vision, so-called, dream, or other remarkable mental impression, would hesitate considerably before he would own to it. To his reticence, I attribute much of this obscurity to which such subjects are involved. We do not habitually communicate our experiences of these subjective things as we do our experiences of objective creation. The consequence is that the general shock of experience in this regard appears exceptional, and really is so, in respect of being miserably imperfect. In what I am going to relate, I have no intention of setting up, opposing, or supporting any theory whatever. I know the history of the bookseller of Berlin. I have studied the case of the wife of the late astronomer royal as related by Sir David Brewster. I have followed the minutest details of a much more remarkable case of spectral illusion occurring within my private circle of friends. It may be necessary to state as to this last that the sufferer, a lady, was in no degree, however distant, related to me. A mistaken assumption on that head might suggest an explanation of a part of my own case, but only a part, which would be wholly without foundation. It cannot be referred to my inheritance of any developed peculiarity, nor had I ever before any at all similar experience, nor have I ever had any at all similar experience since. It does not signify how many years ago, or how few, a certain murder was committed in England, which attracted great attention. We hear more than enough of murderers as they rise in succession to their atrocious eminence, and I would bury the memory of this particular brute, if I could. As his body was buried in Newgate Jail, I purposely abstained from giving any direct clue to the criminal's individuality. When the murder of this was first discovered, no suspicion fell. Or I ought to rather say, for I cannot be too precise in my facts, it was nowhere publicly hinted that any suspicion fell on the man who afterwards brought to trial, as no reference was at the time made to him in the newspapers. It is obviously impossible that any description of him can, at the time, have been given in the newspapers, and is essential that the fact be remembered. Unfolding at breakfast my morning paper containing the account of the first discovery, I found it to be deeply interesting, and I read it with close attention. I read it twice, if not 3 times. The discovery had been made in a bedroom, and, when I laid down the paper, I was aware of a flash, rush, flow, I did not know what to call it, no words I can find to satisfactorily descriptive, in which it seemed to see that bedroom passing through my room, like a picture impossibly painted on a running river. Though, almost instantiously, in this passing it was perfectly clear, so clear that I distinctly, and with a sense of relief, observed the absence of the dead body from the bed. It was no romantic place that I had this curious sensation, but in chambers in Piccadilly, very near to the corner of St. James Street. It was entirely new to me. I was in my easy chair at the moment, and the sensation was accompanied with a peculiar shiver which started the chair from its position. But it is to be noted that the chair ran easily on casters. I went to one of the windows. There were 2 in that room, and the room was on the 2nd floor. I refreshed my eyes with that moving objects down in Piccadilly. It was a bright autumn morning, and the street was sparkling and cheerful. The wind was high. As I looked out, it brought down from the park a quantity of fallen leaves, which a gust took and whirled into a spiral pillar. As the pillar fell, the leaves dispersed. I saw 2 men on the opposite side of the way, going from west to east. There was one behind the other. The foremost man often looked back over his shoulder. The second man followed him, at a distance of some 30 paces, with his right hand menacingly raised. First, the singularity and steadiness of this threatening gesture in so public a thoroughfare attracted my attention. And next, the more remarkable circumstance that nobody heeded it. Both men threaded their way among the other passengers with the smoothness hardly consistent even with the action of walking on pavement, and no singular creature, that I could see, gave them place, touched them, or looked after them. In passing before my window, they both stared up at me. I saw their two faces very distinctly, and I knew I could recognize them anywhere. Not that I had consciously noticed anything very remarkable in either face, except that the man who went first had the unusual lowering appearance, and that the face of the man who followed him was the color of an impure wax. I am a bachelor, and my valet and his wife constitute my whole establishment. My occupation is in a certain branch bank, and I wish that my duties as head of the department were as light as they were popularly supposed to be. They kept me in towards that autumn, when I stood in need of change. I was not ill, but I was not well. My reader is to make the most that can be reasonably made of my feeling jaded, having a depressing sense upon me of monotonous life, and being slightly dyspeptic. I am assured by my renowned doctor that my real state of health at the time justifies no stronger description, and I quote his own from his written answer to my request for it. As the circumstances of the murder, gradually unveiling, took stronger and stronger possession from the public mind, I kept them away from mine by knowing as little about them as possible in the midst of the universal excitement. But I knew that the verdict of the willful murder had been found against the suspected murderer, and that he had been committed to Newgate for trial. I also knew that his trial had been postponed over 1 season of the Central Criminal Court on the ground of general prejudice and want of time for the preparation of the defense. I may further have known that I believe I did not. I further have known, but I believe I did not, when or about when the sessions to which this trial stood postponed would come on. My sitting room, bedroom, and dressing room are all on one floor. With the last there is no communication but through the bedroom. True, there is a door in it, once communicating with the staircase, but a part of that fitting of my bath has been, and had been for some years, fixed across it. At the same period, it is part of the same arrangement. The door had been nailed up and canvassed over. I was standing in my bedroom late one night, giving some directions to my servant before he went to bed. My face was towards the only available door of the communication with the dressing room, and it was closed. My servant's back was towards that door. While I was speaking to him, I saw it open, and a man look in who very earnestly and mysteriously beckoned to me. That man was the man who had gone second of the two along the Piccadilly, and whose face was the color of impure wax. The figure, having beckoned, drew back and closed the door with no longer pause than was made by my crossing the bedroom. I opened the dressing-room door and looked in. I had a lighted candle already in my hand. I felt no inward expectation of seeing the figure in the dressing-room, and I did not see it there. Conscious that my servant stood amazed, I turned around to him and said, "Derek, could you believe that in my cool senses I fancied I saw a—" As I laid my hand upon his breast with a sudden start, he trembled violently and said, "Oh, Lord, yes, sir, a dead man beckoning." Now I do not believe that this John Derrick, my trusty and attached servant for more than 20 years, had any imprevisions whatever of having seen any figure, until I touched him. The change in him was so startling when I touched him that I finally believed he derived his impressions in some occult manner from me at that instant. Ooh, getting good. I bade John Derrick bring some brandy, and I gave him a dram, and was so glad to take one myself. Of what I preceded that night's phenomenon, I told him not a single word. Reflecting on it, I was absolutely certain that I had never seen that face before, except on that one occasion in Piccadilly. Comparing its expression with beckoning at the door with his expression when it had stared up at me as I stood at my window, I came to the conclusion that on the first occasion it had sought to fasten itself upon my memory, and that on the second occasion it had made sure of being immediately remembered. I was not very comfortable that night, though I felt a certainty, difficult to explain, that the figure would not return. At daylight I fell into a heavy sleep, from which I was awakened by John Derrick's coming into my bedside with a paper in his hand. This paper, it appeared, had been the subject of an altercation at the door between its bearer and my servant. It was a summons to me to serve upon a jury with the forthcoming sessions of the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey. I had never before been summoned on such a jury, as John Derrick will know. He believed, I'm not certain at this hour whether with reason or otherwise, that the class of jurors were customarily chosen on a lower qualification than mine, and he had at first refused to accept the summons. The man who served it had taken the matter very coolly. He had said that in my attendance or non-attendance was nothing to him. There the summons was, and I should deal with it in my own peril, and not his. Claire C., how are you? For a day or two I was undecided whether to respond to this call, or take no notice of it. I was not conscious of the slightest mysterious bias, influence, or attraction one way or another. Of that I am as strictly sure as of every other statement that I make here. Ultimately, I decided, as a break in the monotony of my life, that I would go. The appointed morning was a raw morning in the month of November. There was a dense brown fog in Piccadilly, and it became positively black in the last degree, oppressive east of Temple Bar. I found the passages and staircases of the courthouse flaringly lighted with gas, and the court itself similarly illuminated. I think that until I was conducted by officers to the old court and saw its crowded state, I did not know that the murderer was to be tried that day. I think that until I was so helped into the old court with considerable difficulty, I did not know which of the two courts sitting my summons would take me. But this must not be received as a positive assertion, for I am not completely satisfied in my mind on either point. I took my seat in the place appropriated to jurors in waiting, and I looked about the court as well as I could through a cloud of fog and breath that was heavy in it. I noticed the black vapor hanging like a murky curtain outside the great windows, and I noticed the stifled sound of wheels on the straw or tan that was littered in the streets. Also, the hum of the people gathered there, which a shrill whistle or a louder song or hail than the rest occasionally pierced. Soon afterward, the judges, 2 in number, entered and took their seats. The buzz in the court was awfully hushed. The direction was given to put the murderer to the bar. He appeared there, and in that same instant I recognized him in the first of the 2 men who had gone down in Piccadilly. If my name had been called then, I doubt if I could have answered to it audibly. But it was called about 6th or 8th in the panel, and I was by that time able to say, "Here, now observe." As I step into the box, the prisoner, who had been looking on attentively, but with no sign of concern, became violently agitated, and beckoned out to his attorney. The prisoner's wish to challenge me was so manifest that it occasioned a pause, during which the attorney, with his hand upon the dock, whispered with his client, and shook his head. Afterwards had it from that gentleman, with the prisoner's first affrighted words to him were, "At all hazard, challenge that man." But that, as he would give no reason for it, and admitted that he had not even known my name until he heard it called upon it, and I appeared, it was not done. Both on the ground already explained, that I wished to avoid reviving the unwholesome memory of that murderer. and also because a detailed account of his long trial is by no means indispensable to my narrative. I shall confine myself closely to such incidents in the 10 days and nights during which we, the jury, were kept together, as directly bear on my own curious personal experience. It is in that, and not in the murderer, that I seek to interest my reader. It is to that, and not to the page of the Newgate calendar, that I beg attention. I was chosen foreman of the jury. On the second morning of the trial, after evidence had been taken for 2 hours, I heard the church clock strike. Happening to cast my eyes over my brother jurymen, I found an inexplicable difficulty in counting them. I counted them several times, and yet always with the same difficulty. In short, I made them one too many. I touched the brother juryman whose place was next to me, and I whispered to him, "Oblige me by counting us." He looked surprised by the request, but turned his head and counted. "Why?" says he suddenly. "We are but no, it's not possible. No, we are 12." According to my counting that day, we were always right in detail, but in the gross we were always one too many. There was no appearance, no figure, no accountants for it, but I had now an inward foreshadowing of the figure that was surely coming. The jury were housed at the London Tavern, and we all slept in one large room on separate tables, and we were constantly in the charge and under the eye of the officer sworn to hold us in at safe keeping. I see no reason for suppressing the real name of that officer. He was intelligent, highly polite, and obliging, and, I was glad to hear, much respected in the city. He had an agreeable presence, good eyes, inviolable black whiskers, and a fine, sonorous voice. His name was Mr. Harker. When we turned into our 12 beds that night, Mr. Harker's bed was drawn across the door. On that night of the second day, not being disposed to lie down, and seeing Mr. Harker sitting on his bed, I went in and sat beside him and offered him a pinch of snuff. As Mr. Harker's hand touched mine in taking it from my box, a peculiar shiver crossed him, and he said, "Who is this?" Following Mr. Harker's eyes and looking along the room, I saw again the figure I expected, the second of the two men who had gone down Piccadilly. I rose and advanced a few steps, then stopped. And the jury were and looked around at Mr. Harker. He was quite unconcerned, laughed, and said in a pleasant way, "I thought for a moment we had a 13th juryman without a bed, but I see it's just the moonlight." Making no revelation to Mr. Harker, but inviting him to take a walk with me to the end of the room, I watched what the figure did. It stood for a few moments by the bedside of each of my 11 brother jurymen, close to a pillow. It always went to the right-hand side of the bed, and always pressed out, crossing a foot of the next bed. It seemed, from the action of the head, merely to look down pensively to each recumbent figure. It took no notice of me or of my bed, which was that nearest to Mr. Harker's. It seemed to go out where the moonlight came in, through a high window, as by an aerial flight of stairs. Next morning at breakfast, it appeared that everybody present had dreamed of the murdered man last night, except myself and Mr. Harker. I now felt as convinced that the second man who had gone down Piccadilly was the murdered man, so to speak, as if it had been borne into my comprehension by his immediate testimony. But even this took place, and in a manner of which I was not at all prepared. On the 5th day of the trial, when the case for the prosecution was drawing to a close, a miniature of a murdered man missing from his bedroom upon the discovery of the deed, and afterwards found in a hiding place where the murderer had been seen digging, was put in evidence. Having been identified by the witness under examination, it was handed up to the bench, and thence handed down to be inspected by the jury. As an officer in the black gown was making his way with it across to me, the figure of the second man who had gone down Piccadilly impetuously started from the crowd, caught the miniature from the officer, and gave it to me with his own hands, at the same time saying in a low and hollow tone, before I saw the miniature, which was in a locket, I was younger then, and my face was not as drained of blood. It also came between me and the brother juryman to whom I would given the miniature, and between him and the brother juryman to whom he would have given it, and so passed it on through the whole of our numbers, and back to my possession. Not one of them, however, detected this. At table, and generally when we were shut up together in Mr. Harker's custody, we had from the first naturally discussed on the day's proceedings a good deal. On that fifth day, the case for the prosecution being closed, and we having that side of the question in the completed shape before us, our discussion was more animated than serious. Among our number was a vestryman, the densest idiot I have ever seen at large, who met the plainest evidence with the most preposterous objections, and who was cited by two flabby, periacal parasites. All the three impaneled from the distinct so delivered over to fever that they ought to have been upon their own trial for 500 murders. When these mischievous blockheads were at their loudest, which was towards midnight, while some of us were already preparing for bed, I again saw that murdered man. He stood grimly behind them, beckoning to me. On my going towards them and striking into conversation, he immediately retired. This was the beginning of a separate series of appearances, confined to that long room in which we were confined. Whenever a knot of my brother jurymen laid their heads together, I saw the head of the murdered man among theirs. Whenever their comparison of notes was going against him, he would solemnly and irresistibly beckon to me. I will be borne in mind that down to the production of the miniature on the fifth day of the trial, I had never seen the appearance in court. 3 changes occurred now that we entered the case for the defense. 2 of them I will mention together. First, the figure was now in court continually, and it never there addressed itself to me, but always for the person who was speaking at the time. For instance, the throat of the murdered man had been cut straight across. In the opening speech for the defense, it was suggested that the deceased might have cut his own throat. At that very moment, the figure, with his throat in a dreadful condition, referred to this it had concealed before, stood at the speaker's elbow, motioning across and across his windpipe, now with the right hand, now with the left, vigorously suggesting to the speaker himself the impossibility of such a wound having been self-inflicted by either hand. For another instance, a witness to character, a woman, deposed to the prisoners being the most admirable of mankind, the figure at the instant stood at the floor before her, looking her full in the face, and pointing out the prisoner's evil countenance with an extended arm and an outstretched finger. The third change now to be added impressed me strongly as the most marked and striking of all. I do not theorize upon it, I accurately state it, and there leave it. Although the appearance was not itself perceived by those whom it addressed, its coming close to such persons was invariably attended by some trepidation or disturbance on their part. It seemed to me as if it were prevented by laws to which I was not amenable from fully revealing to itself to others, and yet as if it could invisibly, dumbly, and darkly overshadow their minds. When the leading counsel for the defense suggested that hypothesis of suicide, and the figure stood at the learned gentleman's elbow, frightfully sawing at a severed throat, it is undeniable that the counsel faltered in his speech, lost for a few seconds the thread of his ingenious discourse, wiped his forehead with his handkerchief, and turned extremely pale. When the witness to character was confronted by the appearance, her eyes most certainly did follow the direction of its pointed finger, and rest in great hesitation and trouble upon the prisoner's face. 2 additional illustrations will suffice. On the 8th day of the trial, after the pause which was every day made early in the afternoon for the few minutes' rest and refreshment, I came back into court with the rest of the jury some little time before the return of the judges. Standing up in the box and looking about me, I thought the figure was not there until Chancing to raise my eyes to the gallery, I saw it bending forward and leaning over a very distant woman, as if to assure itself whether the judges had resumed their seats or not. Immediately afterwards, the woman screamed, fainted, and was carried out. So with the venerable, sagacious, and patient judge who conducted the trial when the case was over, and he settled himself and his papers to sum up the murdered man, entering by the judge's door, advancing to his lordship's desk, and looked eagerly over his shoulder at the pages of his notes when he was turning. Notes which he was turning. A change came over his lordship's face. His hands stopped. A peculiar shiver that I knew so well passed over him, and he faltered, "Excuse me, gentlemen, for a few moments. I am somewhat oppressed by a vivid air," and did not recover until he had drunk a glass of water. Through all the monotony of 6 of those interminable 10 days, the same judges and others on the bench, the same murderer in the dock, the same lawyers at the table, the same tones of questions and answers rising to the roof of the court, the same scratching of the judge's pen, the same ushers going in and out, the same lights kindled on the same hour when they were then there any natural light of day. The same foggy curtain outside the great window when it was foggy, the same rain pattering and dripping when it was rainy, the same footmarks of turnkeys and prisoners day after day of the same sawdust, the same keys locking and unlocking the same heavy doors. Through all the wearisome monotony, which made me feel as if I had been foreman of the jury for the vast period of time, and Piccadilly had flourished coevally with Babylon, the murdered man never lost one trace of his distinctness in my eyes, nor was he at any moment less distinct than anybody else. I must not omit, as a matter of fact, that I never once saw the appearance which I call by the name of the murdered man. Look at the murderer again and again and wondered why does he not? But he never did. Nor did he look at me after the production of the miniature. Until the last closing minutes of the trial arrived, we retired to consider, at 7 minutes before 10 at night. The idiotic vestryman and his 2 periocal parasites gave us so much trouble that we twice returned to the court and begged to have certain extracts from judges' notes reread. 9 of us had not the smallest doubt about those passages, neither, I believe, had any one in the court, and dunderheaded triumvirate, having no idea but obstruction, disputed them for that very reason. At length we prevailed, and finally the jury returned to court at 10 minutes past 12. The murdered man at the time stood directly opposite the jury box, on the other side of the court. As I took my place, his eyes rested on me with great attention. He seemed satisfied, and slowly shook a great gray veil, which he carried on his arm for the first time. Over his head, the whole form. As I gave in our verdict, guilty, the veil collapsed, all was gone, and his place was empty. The murderer being asked by the judges, according to usage, whether he had anything to say before sentence of death should be passed upon him, indistinctly muttered something which was described in the leading newspaper of the following day as a few rambling, incoherent, and half-audible words, in which he was understood to complain that he had not had a fair trial, because the foreman of the jury was prepossessed against him. The remarked declaration that he rarely made was this: "My lord, I knew I was a doomed man when the foreman of my jury came into the box. My lord, I knew he would never let me off because, before I was taken, he somehow got to my bedside at night, woke me up, and put a rope around my neck." Hey, what's up, Pokey Jones? Hope you're doing well, Jonesy. He's listening and well and says hi. Hello, Dexter. I hope you are doing well. That was the end of the story. They got to the verdict, and as he was being taken away, he said, "I saw the foreman. Before I was taken, he somehow got to my bedside in the night, woke me, and put a rope around my neck." There's a twist. What a twist! We were able to do it in 2 hours. Sorry, under 3 hours. And we read all 3 books. All 3 stories in that book, I should say. I'm just going to open this real quick. I'm going to do one more just because I did say in the description, made chores less sucky. Excellent. Dark one indeed. This one is by Edgar Allan Poe. I figured we'd do this one and then we'll find someone to go raid. It's quite literally only like 6 pages, so this one will be quick, but I did get this one as well. It is called The Mask of the Red Death. Again, I do want to put a disclaimer on there. I have not read through this one yet, so I apologize if there's anything too grotesque or scary. I will absolutely change course. Just saying. But The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from his aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the depth seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty, well-guarded wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world would take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and scrutiny were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at the masked ball of his own unusual magnificence. It was the voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But the first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. These were 7. An imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on the other hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here, the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bazaar. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, now, the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor, which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose colors varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were its casements. The fourth was furnished with lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black, velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon the carpet of the same material and hue. But in the chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lump of candelabrum amid the profusion and golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro, or dependent from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire. That projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenance of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs the clock sound, which was so clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken the sound, and thus the waltzers' performance ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And, while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedated passed their hands over their brows, and if in a confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had finally ceased, the light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly had made whispering vows, each to each other, that the next chiming of the clock would produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after a lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then there were the same disconcert and tumultuousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were particular. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric lust. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of the great fete. It was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There was an arabesque of figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman's fashion. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers were stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps, and anon their strikes on the ebony clock which stand in the halls of velvet. And then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats again after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which seem the rays of the tripod. But to the chamber, which lies most westwardly of the seven, there were now none of the maskers who venture, for the night was waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him, whose foot falls on the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly and pathetic than that any which reaches their ears, who indulged in more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the hearth of life. And the revel went whirlingly on, until, at length, there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among people who reveled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of the masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there rose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive in disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it might well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth and masquerade, license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There were chords in the hearts of most of the reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even then, the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jests can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closet scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured if not approved by the mad revelers all around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was daubed in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of his face, was bespeckled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell on the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain the role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of his courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blazon feminist mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know who we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chambers, in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was a blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of a group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe within which the mad assumptions of the murmur had aspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within the yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centres of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first. Through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, error had decided movement, and been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and ashamed of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of the deadly terror that seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and he approached, in rapid impetuosity, to within 3 or 4 feet of this retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterward, fell, prostrate in death, the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the murmurer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cremence of a corpse-like mask, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by intangible form, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of this ebony clock went out with that of its last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and the darkness and decay of the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. Well, that's what you get when you personify a disease. Appreciate you all. What's up, Sean Bowden? It's good to see you, fam. I hope everybody made chores less. I love making chores less sucky. But yeah, that was a really short one, and I wanted and needed it to be because still have to still have to eat dinner actually. So I am going to look right now for someone to raid, and then we will do that. Love story time. I love that you guys love story time. It is my absolute favorite thing to look forward to on Monday is getting through the workday and getting able to being able to spend a lot of time with y'all. I know I went an additional hour from what I normally do, but you mentioned that Dexter just got home, so I wanted to make sure to do a story for everybody. Let's see. We have our boy Red or Blue. We do seem to raid Red or Blue on Monday, so I think we're gonna do that and keep with the tradition on Monday. He is a really, really great streamer. I know everybody knows Rob, but Red or Blue, he is just always like one of our biggest advocates when we go over there. So, oh, it's absolutely no thing at all, Miss Lovejoy. And Dex, I hope you had an amazing day And I hope you have a better night. It's night for me. I'm sure it's not quite night yet. But I really, really appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for coming in um, and enjoying the story time with me. As we move into our next run of stories, I think we're going to just kind of skip like November and go straight for Christmas. So these three ghost stories were written by Charles Dickens, and that's going to be the author of the next book we're going to read, which is going to be A Christmas Carol, which unironically is about three ghosts of Christmas. So certainly do appreciate you guys, and I am looking forward to that. We got 24 likes on this stream. But everybody, regardless, I always want you to remember to go out and get everything. Always learn a ton about Japanese. Oh yeah, he's he's about the art. He's about the art too. But y'all go out and get everything that you set out to get. Excellent. I'll check it right now, Miss Lovejoy. I promise. But don't let anything stop you. But remember, it takes $0 to be a good person. So always do that through peace, love, and Pokemon. And thank you all for believing in ghosts. I really appreciate you guys. Christmas ghosts. So random. I like random. But y'all hang tight. We'll be redirected here. But yeah, I will see you all next on Thursday. Come on back and join us. We're going to be finishing our Squirtle to join our friend Bulbasaur up here. So really appreciate it, Rafa. Have a good rest of your night, fam. I'll see you over there for a minute.